2 people have been killed, another injured, and several houses reportedly set ablaze in a fresh wave of attacks on communities in Plateau State. The violence, which occurred across several locations, has once again raised serious concerns about the safety of rural communities and the ability of security agencies to prevent repeated attacks. According to reports, the attacks occurred on Tuesday night in at least 4 locations, including Gwa-Wereng Rim, Geyang Village in Bachi District, Dorong, and Yol Village. The Birom Youth Mothers Association confirmed the killings in a statement issued on Wednesday by its National Publicity Secretary, Rang Tengwong. At Gwa-Wereng Rim, gunmen reportedly invaded the community at about 9:30 p.m. and opened fire on residents. One of the victims was identified as Bolos Mangwong, popularly known as Diko. His cousin Yakubu was also attacked and seriously injured. At Geyang Village in Bachi District, 47-year-old Stephen Dacholum Case was reportedly killed at about 8:30 p.m. But the violence did not stop with the shootings. At Dorong, attackers allegedly set houses ablaze, destroying properties and forcing residents to flee. At Yol Village, armed attackers reportedly exchanged gunfire with local vigilantes, further increasing tension in the area. The pattern is disturbing. These were not reports of violence confined to one location. Several communities were reportedly affected within the same period, leaving residents frightened and uncertain about what could happen next. The Birom Youth Mothers Association condemned the attacks, describing them as a serious threat to the lives, livelihoods, and safety of rural residents. The association called on security agencies to strengthen their presence in vulnerable communities, intensify surveillance, and pursue those responsible for the killings and destruction. They also urge authorities to arrest and prosecute the perpetrators and provide assistance to families who lost relatives, homes, and property. But this latest violence raises a much larger question. Why do communities continue to face deadly attacks despite repeated calls for stronger security? For people living in rural areas, insecurity is not an abstract political issue. It affects their ability to sleep, farm, travel, and provide for their families. A farmer who cannot safely reach his farmland can lose an entire season's income. A family whose house is burnt may have nowhere to return to. And when residents flee because of violence, schools, markets, and other community activities can quickly collapse. This is why the attacks in Plateau are particularly concerning. The communities affected are not simply losing property. They are losing the sense of security required for normal life. And while residents were still dealing with the Tuesday night attacks, another incident was reported on Wednesday in Magu local government area. The violence reportedly affected communities along the Sabogari, Magu, Hale Mai, Rana, Ragai, Mararamban, Kamtuma Aziz. Several people were reportedly injured, while one person was feared killed. Residents fled their homes, with women and children among those escaping from the affected communities. Travelers passing through the area described a tense atmosphere, with some settlements appearing deserted. One traveler, Gyang Dochu, said the communities were largely deserted, particularly by women, highlighting the level of fear created by the violence. The national president of the Mahova Development Association, Bullocks Dabit, confirmed that an attack had occurred. He said several people were injured and alleged that some villages were burnt. He also said youth who mobilized to protect their communities were attacked and injured. David said he knew of at least one person who had died, although he could not immediately establish the final casualty figure. But his most serious warning concerned the apparent scale of the attack. He argued that the level of mobilization suggested that the violence might be more than an isolated confrontation between individuals. That claim has not been independently established, but it raises an important question about whether the attacks represent isolated incidents or part of a broader pattern of organized violence. That question requires a serious investigation. Security agencies need to establish who carried out the attacks, whether the incidents were connected, how the attackers were able to move into the communities, and what intelligence was available before the violence occurred. David said security operatives had been deployed to the affected communities and that the situation was relatively calmed by Wednesday night. The deployment is welcomed, but the bigger challenge is maintaining security after the immediate crisis has passed. A temporary security presence may calm residents for a short period, but vulnerable communities need sustained protection and rapid response capabilities. The objective should not be to arrive after homes have been burnt and people have been killed. The objective should be to detect threats early and stop attacks before they happen. That requires intelligence. It requires surveillance. And it also requires security agencies to understand the movements and networks of those responsible for repeated attacks. The Plateau State Police Command also faces pressure to clarify what happened. Its spokesperson, Alabo Alfred, was reportedly unavailable for comment at the time of the report. Several important questions therefore remain unanswered. Who carried out the attacks? Were the incidents connected? How many attackers were involved? How many homes were destroyed? How many people were injured or killed? And what measures are being put in place to prevent another attacks? For the residents of Gwawereng Rim, Giyang, Dorong, Yol, and the affected communities in Mango, these questions are not theoretical. They are questions of survival. People want to sleep in their homes without fearing gunshots. They want to work on their farms without fearing attacks. They want their children to attend school safely. And they want to know that security forces will respond quickly when their communities come under threat. The latest violence should therefore not end with condemnation statements. Authorities must investigate the attacks, identify those responsible, and ensure that perpetrators face justice. At the same time, vulnerable communities require stronger preventive security, better intelligence gathering, and faster emergency response. Because every attack creates consequences far beyond the immediate casualties. Families lose loved ones. Children lose parents. Farmers lose their livelihoods. Homes are destroyed. Residents are displaced. And confidence in government protection continues to weaken. Plateau State cannot afford another cycle of escalating violence. The deaths of Bulos, Mwangwong, and Stephen Dacholum Gaze should not become just two more names in Nigeria's growing list of victims. Their deaths should reinforce the urgency of protecting rural communities before violence strikes again. Because when citizens become too frightened to sleep in their own homes, cultivate their own lands, or travel through their own communities, the crisis is no longer simply about isolated attacks. It becomes a direct threat to the ability of entire communities to live normal lives. And that is why what happens next in Plateau State matters. not only to the victims of these latest attacks, but to every resident who wants to know whether their home is still a safe place to live. For more updates, stay with us on News Express. I am Cassie Tony.